Well, this is Baruch Fleischman, and I'm back here at the Tigun Elevator Kollel, and we're reading from Likutei Maharan, publication for the Breslov Research Institute, with a Pirush. Sometimes could be very, very good. Let's come over here and read the ideas of Rebbe Nachman talking about confession, the need and the ability, through confession, to uproot really, really bad lesions that have occurred in our lives as a result of sins that we've done, things that we've done wrong. So he says like this, and all the objects and material existence in the world originate from letters. The letters come from Malchus. That's what we learned in last lecture. This is because material existence is a consequence of Malchus. Malchus is physicality, it's destination, it's designation. It's a place. It's a place of the Holy One's desire that his Malchus be revealed in the world. Now, the Malchus that we're talking about, that he wants to talk about, is the Malchus of Atzilus, of Olam Atzilus, of that which is almost completely and totally nothing, but exists as a spiritual essence in Olam Atzilus. That same Olam Atzilus, though, has a replication in Olam Abriya, and Olam Yitzira, and Olam Asiyah. These are the four worlds. And the Olam Asiyah where we live, it's replicated here as well. So he says, what we want to reveal here is Malchus revealed in the world through that. Through this, he created the world ex nihilo. We have to see what that means. He's got a little verb on that. All the wills, the forms, and all material existence corresponding to Malchus receive their vitality from the will of the Ein Sof. It is taught in every place that you find the greatness of the Holy One, his Malchus, his wills. There you will find his humility. So let's just see what we can get out of this. There's a lot of really nice stuff over here, so let's see what he said. He says, originate from the letters. Let's take a look at this. Originate from the letters. Letters of speech are the primordial building blocks of creation. God created everything through them. Now, which letters are we talking about? We're talking of the Hebrew alphabet. There are 22 regular letters and 5 letters which repeat. They're called the double letters or the long letters. By the words of God, the heavens were made. The words of God, heavens were made by words. And by the breath of his mouth, all their hosts. That's a quote. Ex nihilo, the meaning, fundamental to Jewish belief, is that God created the world out of nothingness. It's called yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. In other words, by veiling his light, he was able to create something. This is the meaning of creatio ex nihilo. Creatio ex nihilo. He says, in addition, we know that creation is the results of God's will to reveal his Malchus in the world. Okay, so we had that idea. Okay, so we read over to this little place over here. And this is an aspect of stripping oneself of corporeality. Now, when we say that Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humble of all people, and he wrote that line, that is he that wrote that line. He says that the stripping oneself of corporeality. For when a person wants to be encompassed in the will of the Ein Sof, he must negate his material being. Not so easy to do. He writes over here, let's just pick up from this line right here. The Eitz Yosef, apparently it's a sefer, I don't know, explains this passage in the Talmud as follows. Although people in positions of prestige and authority only cherish the praise of peers and those above them, and put little value in the praise they receive from those beneath them, Scripture points out that, in contrast, wherever God's greatness is mentioned, he's associated with the lower echelons of society. the impoverished widows, orphans, converts, and the like. If anything, his unfathomable greatness manifests in his amazing humility. That despite our unworthiness, he values us enough to reveal his greatness and welcome our praise. In our context, the revelation of God's greatness corresponds to Malchus. Malchus is the place where the light is revealed, the level at which his will becomes manifest. And so revealed goes with the word manifest. So we have a word at the very basis of creation, the basic beginning of the creation, which is Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. But the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is almost nothing and can only be manifest in a lower world, in the world of Zeir Anpin. So he said, and as explained, Malchus is actually an extension of Ayin, of nothing, which is his humility. Therefore, in every place that you find greatness, Malchus, there you find his humility, that is, of the Ein Sof Baruch Hu. Now, I'm just thinking back to that idea that I mentioned last year about Rabbi Maharan's concept of nothing being around us all the time. It's not hard to find nothing. Most everything is nothing. But we concentrate and focus on ourselves defensively, whatever we have to do. So with this next idea, stripping oneself of corporeality, this concept is mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch as the ideal state of mind for prayer. Now think about this. In the Kabbalistic world, during different places, I'm not going to go through them right now, I'm not organized to think about it, there is the concept of the Arba Misos based in. And all brachos, every bracha, there's this concept. So there's one place where every single bracha has this concept. That is, Skilas Reife Chereg Vehenig. That we thinking that as we're praying, that we're in certain places in the prayer, we offer a tremendous aliyah of our own souls. So he says the ideal state for prayer is where we completely nullify our egos. This is because prayer corresponds to Malchus, and ascending to Ein Sof during prayer corresponding to elevating Malchus to its source right back again. This is the aliyah also known in Kabbalah as the aliyah of Malchus to Bina. So this is the aliyah of the lower Hey, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, of the lower Hey, to the second K. Second K is attached to the Yud, and so on. And Reb Nosson adds that this is the ultimate goal, stripping oneself of corporeality in order to achieve unity with the Ein Sof, in whom all is good and beneficent. However, he points out, not everybody can attain this level, which requires that a person negate his selfhood entirely, break all the evil desires that stem from the four elements that were discussed earlier, and confess in front of the Tzaddik, as the Rebbe explained above. Now, this is what is written in the Zohar, he says, this is what written in the Zohar, that Moshe passed away on Shabbat, at the time of Mincha, which is the afternoon prayer. Because at that time, and after Mincha on Shabbat, is the highest time of the whole Shabbat. That is when the Rabba the Rabbin, the will of wills, is revealed. So Rabba the Rabbin, the will of wills. In other words, that you ultimately get close to the will of wills. This is the will of the Ein Sof, from whom all wills and all material existence received their vitality. This was because Moshe had totally negated his material being. So he's saying like this, in terms of physicality, the thinnest form of physicality, in other words, our highest level of being non-physical, takes place at Mincha time, in the afternoon of Shabbos. And his material being, as is written, after all, Nachno Ma. He says, after all, what are we? That's the phrase in the book of Shemos. He writes like this: afternoon, that is the time of Mincha. Wants to say this is a special time. And before that he said, negate his material being. This is because all material existence is a result of Malchus. Because Malchus is the place where all of the spheros, all the flow from all the different aspects flow into there. And it's multiples. Negating one's material being is returning Malchus to its source. We said that. So time of Mincha. Now why Mincha time did he die? Afternoon, the time for the Mincha prayer. That's a time of judgment. The exception is on Shabbat, when the Mincha time judgments are stayed, and instead there's a tremendous amount of kindness, because this is a place of tremendous aliyah of Zer Anpin to the beard of Eric Anpin, which is Kesser. The will of wills is revealed at that time. The highest spiritual revelation of the week takes place on Shabbat afternoon, when an influx of spiritual energy from the Rav of the Ravin, that is the will of wills, is manifest in the world. Now I will say to this also, that commentaries, many try to understand how nothing gets started into something, because nothing by definition is nothing, so how does it have a start or anything like that? So that's why they fill in, they dwell on the word will. Somehow there's a development of a direction. A will is a direction, a set of directions in a direction. So he says the will of wills is manifest in the world. This spiritual influx emanates from Kesser, once again, we say beyond, and more specifically from the upper aspect of Kesser, which is known as Atika Kadisha. Now Kesser is also known, that is Eric Anpin, is also known as Atika Kadisha. And as I said before, there's another Atika, which is not called Atika Kadisha, it's called Atik Yamim, which is inside of the Atika Kadisha, meaning it's preliminary to it, the Panimi to it. So the divine persona, to the degree that this will, the will of the Ein Sof, is revealed and recognized, Malchus is negated. In other words, a differentiation. Let's read this little piece. Nachnu ma, what are we? This was the distinct level of humility in which Moshe surpassed all other tzaddikim. Whereas Abraham said, I am but dust and ashes, and King David said, I am a worm less than human. Now, we saw this idea of the worm in something else that we learned recently, but I can't remember where. Moshe said of himself in Aram, after all, what are we? So total was a negation in the will of the Ein Sof. In other words, he saw only the Ein Sof, and somehow he saw that he was zoicha to be able to translate and become an interface between the Ein Sof and the Jewish people, to bring us laws and to set us in the right path. And because Moshe negated his material being so completely, he passed away at the time of Kesser's revelation, which is at the time of Mincha on Shabbos, when all judgments are mitigated, and loving kindness, which is described in the literature as whiteness, with no blemish. Whiteness, a loving kindness alone prevails. In our context, this is when Yud Kei Vav Kei and Elokim are one. This is called the Shiluv of the concept, the male concept, which is the manifestation of the name of God, and Elokim, which is also a name of God, but refers to the dinim, are the female aspect. And they come to oneness when Malchus is bound with Kesser. That's the aliyah of Malchus. We call the aliyah of Malchus the Bina, but it's also ultimately higher. Rebbe Nachman now connects, coming to the tzaddik and confessing in front of him with how the tzaddik, because of his deep humility, secures God's forgiveness for the person and so rectifies everything. This happens because the tzaddik ascends to Ein Sof, the highest of levels, the will of wills. There he gains the power to vanquish Malchus on the other side and elevate a rectified Malchus to Kesser. Now let's go back over to this again. What can the tzaddik do? He can gain the forgiveness of God. It happens because the tzaddik ascends to the Ein Sof. In other words, he is able to actually communicate on that level. The highest of levels, the will of wills. So the tzaddik is able to go to the source of the wills. At this place, he gains the power to vanquish the malchus of the other sides. And the malchus of the other side is the malchus of illusion. And elevates a rectified malchus to keter. In other words, a malchus which understands the source of everything. Remember that idea that he said is that when you recognize that the bad things that happen to you are good, then what you're really seeing is that the goodness really pervades everything. It's you that's off, and you have to get back into harmony with the message. This, the Rebbe explains, is the deeper meaning of Moshe's having passed away on Shabbat afternoon. He passed away into will of wills, and thereby gained forgiveness for the Jewish people's sins, as we shall next see. So Reb Nosson adds this idea. He said the Rebbe's insight into the meaning of Moshe's passing in the site of his burial can be extended to apply even now to our visiting the grave sites of the tzaddikim, becoming attached to the tzaddik by praying there, confessing our sins, and seeking guidance in breaking our evil desires. I think you probably couldn't see that. I didn't have it down there low enough. I apologize for that. This is Baruch Fleischman. I get it carried away a little bit. I'm sorry.